Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, I am going to be talking about monsters once again. I was surprised to discover this will be the 8th time I've discussed monsters, so hopefully I won't be saying anything about things I've already talked about. I got away from doing the horse race stats with the countries that were listening to the show the most. I must say that Great Britain, Australia, and Canada are all tied for first place. That's a new one. Ghana is still in the race. They always show pretty well each week. I guess people in Ghana like listening to me. Or maybe it's one guy likes listening over and over. I don't know. Tanzania. Somebody in Tanzania is listening, and that was a bit of a surprise. I often wonder what my listening audience looks like. I remember one time in the past I said something about, if you get a chance, just send me a photograph so I know what some of my listeners look like. I've gotten a few, and it's always a surprise to see who is listening. It's also a surprise to go to the store to buy things for my wife and come home with a new dog. There was a big, real big, as in 40 pounds, a dog laying in the middle of the parking lot. He looked like he'd been in a fight or two, and he'd been living on the street for a long time. He was dirty. No collar, nobody laid claim to him, and the people in the shopping center had been feeding him, because there were several food bowls sitting around. You could tell they'd all come from the dollar store, and there was dog food and water, but he was just laying in the middle of the street like he was trying to commit suicide or something. I don't know. I picked him up, I carried him over, laid him in the grass so he wouldn't be a road bump. A couple minutes later, he walked back out and laid in the middle of the street, and I thought, no, that just ain't right. After being at the store for about 30 minutes, he wound up in the back seat of my truck. Now he's living in the backyard. Big dog. So now I have another dog to take care of. That's life. If you happen to find a stray out there, and don't bring him to me, take him home to your own backyard and take care of him. Somebody has to take care of these poor animals. Like Pink Floyd said, everyone knows that a dog needs a home. I wonder if that family that I met, me and my wife met from France, are listening up. Hopefully they're enjoying the show. Sebastian Elode Pico, along with their 3 kids, are traveling around the world in an RV. They had it shipped over from Europe after they'd visited all the countries over there. I understand they've been on the road for a year or so now. I hope they're enjoying their time in Mexico. They were headed south the last time we saw them. We were at the park walking around, and we saw an RV parked by the side of the area there, and got to talking to them. That's an interesting thing to do. I envy them, but I don't think I'd want to travel around in an RV for too long. It's a pretty small area. You gotta really like the people you're with. After doing the show on Coal Shack last week, I got a very good response, and I thought about doing a show on human monsters. One thing led to another, and I wound up doing a show on just plain old monsters. Like I said, this will be the 8th time. A lot of bizarre sightings come from folks in the military. Why, you might ask? Well, you spend a lot of time walking around or standing in one spot with not much else to do. Part of your job is looking around to make sure that nobody's trying to sneak up on you. You're guarding the area, which means hopefully you're awake and looking around. You try to do that for 8 hours in a night. But that's what you're expected to do. It's one of the general orders. I will guard everything within the limits of my post and quit my post only when properly relieved. Some things you just can't get out of your mind. Anyway, so when I went to the military, that was one of the first things we learned was how to guard stuff. I had quit smoking because I didn't want to have that addiction, dragging me to the PX every other week. And I wanted to be in fairly good shape because there's a lot of running to be done. And so I quit smoking. Well, it didn't take me very long to get back to smoking. One reason was if you're standing around not doing anything, the drill sergeants would be more than happy to find something for you to do, like pick up trash, sweep the sidewalks, things you just didn't want to do. If you were standing there smoking a cigarette, well, that meant you were doing something, and they would usually leave you alone, as long as you didn't drop your cigarette butts on the ground. The cigarettes were only 50 cents a pack at the time, and the nicotine did help you relax, and trust me, in the basic, you needed something to help relax. At one time, C rations in the military came with a small pack of cigarettes inside, back when smoking was considered good for you. I never saw anything while in the darkness of Fort Knox, but I did hear something big crashing around out in the trees one night. I kept telling myself it was just a bear. I was on guard duty at a motor pool full of M60 tanks out in the mountains of Kentucky. There was an 8-foot-high fence all around the place, but there was no place to hide should something happen. Say a giant animal were to come over the fence who was hungry and I looked like dinner. The only thing I had to defend myself with was a plastic clipboard with my general orders written on it, so I could study them while standing out in the cold and dark. That's why I remember them. The longer I stood there, the bigger this thing got in my mind. All the tanks were locked, and there was no guard shack. It was just a big fenced-in area, a gravel parking lot with tanks. No garage, nothing. The lights were all on the inside of the fence, so everything 10 feet from the fence was pitch black. I had no idea what was crashing around out there, but it was making a lot of noise. Bears don't usually make noise like that, and in the wintertime, when it's snowing, they're hibernating. But I kept telling myself it's just a bear. It sounded like whatever this thing was fighting with something else. Maybe it was fighting with a tree or another creature. But for about 2 hours that I was stuck out there in the cold and the dark, I had no idea what it was, and I never found out. Nobody ever came forward and said, "Oh, hey, by the way, there's a giant something or other out there in the trees." So to me, I kept thinking, well, it's just a bear. And in case you're wondering, yes, bears can climb fences. In 1943, a Mr. Farrell of the Royal Observer Corps was keeping an eye out for German bombers. Germany had taken over Norway, and there was a possibility of enemy planes coming from that direction. Great Britain had radar, but it was expensive to build and maintain, so most of the units were along the channel nearest to the mainland. The Home Guard was stationed all along the coast, looking for any signs of enemy aircraft. Farrell was stationed near Loch Ness. One morning, Farrell was scanning the skies when he noticed a large animal in the loch. Using his binoculars, he was able to see this huge animal of some kind was swimming through the water. As it swam, it would put its head underwater and then bring the head back up on a long neck. It looked like the thing was feeding on perhaps a school of fish under the water. He was able to see enough of the creature to describe it as having a 4-foot-long neck, flippers, and a small head. The Loch Ness Monster has been seen by hundreds of people ever since the 1600s. Since over 1600 years. U.S. Air Force Private Sinclair Taylor was stationed at Camp Okubo, near Kyoto, Japan in 1952. While on guard duty one evening, he heard something that sounded like huge flapping wings passing over his head. He looked up, trying to see what was making the sound. In the sky over him was a gigantic bird. To the witness, it looked like this thing was about to attack him. The beast came closer, and Taylor was able to make out more details. The thing was at least 7 feet tall, had an enormous wingspan. One report said that the creature had bright red eyes that glowed as if lit from within. The body and head was that of a man. As this flying humanoid slowly descended towards him, Taylor brought up his rifle and fired at this bizarre birdman. He continued to fire even after it hit the ground. When he finally went over to where the body had hit, he couldn't find it. It had simply vanished. The birdman had been hit by several .30-06 rounds. The creature should have been dead before it even hit the ground, but it was gone. Taylor had to submit a report after having fired his rifle. As he told his story, his commander wasn't all that shocked. He said this was not the first time a huge flying human had been seen in the area. Just the year before, a guard had reported seeing the same creature, only it never got close enough for him to shoot at. Residents in the area had reported seeing what they believed to be giant birds, and there were sporadic reports of strange lights in the sky as well. The sightings all seemed to have happened over just a couple of years and seemed to have stopped suddenly as if the creature had moved on or something. In 2011, over 400 miles to the southwest, a flying humanoid was seen circling over the nuclear power plant. Marcus Pules said he saw what looked like the Mothman in the sky over the plant. He was in Japan on business and was staying with a friend. One day, the two friends went out to look around town, and in the evening they went to the seashore, walking along a trail that kind of meandered along the coast near the Daiichi Fukushima nuclear plant. As they walked along, Pulis heard a whooshing sound in the air above his head. They didn't see what was making the sound and just kind of wrote it off as maybe the sound of the waves crashing on the shore being bounced off of something. Still looking around, Pulis saw a weird-looking creature standing on top of one of the buildings at the plant. It was lit by the surrounding lights. As he watched, the creature unfurled huge wings and jumped up into the air. The pair could see what looked like a winged human flying around the plant. It let out an ear-splitting shriek. Other people who were walking in the area all looked up at the creature. Some were pointing at it and aiming their cell phones, trying to get a photograph, or maybe a video. The flying humanoid circled the plant a few times, and then it flew away towards the town. Once back home, the two talked about this strange thing, not sure what it was or where it had gotten to. Pulis returned to the United States, and he didn't think much about the flying thing until he heard about the Fukushima power plant explosion. This report got him to believing that they had seen the Mothman as some kind of a portent to the coming disaster. Now, the winged creature that Private Taylor had seen sounded almost exactly like the same flying humanoid from Fukushima. We know what happened in 2011, but what world event might have happened in 1952? On March 4th, a magnitude 8.1 earthquake with a tsunami did hit off the coast of Takashi region, about 900 miles away. I could find no huge disaster near Kyoto in 1952. This may not have been a Mothman-type sighting. It may have been some other creature that resembles the Mothman, or maybe the disaster just wasn't recorded. The military has a reputation for doing weird things. A guy I used to work with was stationed in the Philippines back in the 60s and 70s. Late one night, he was assigned to guard a fleet of float planes. These were loaded with supplies in case they had to fly somewhere and bring relief to a sinking boat or somebody stranded on an island. People would sneak in at night and try to steal the supplies from these airplanes, and his job was to stop them. Shoot if necessary. At around 4 o'clock one morning, he spotted a man trying to get into one of the planes. He yelled for the subject to halt, and then fired when the man didn't. The guy was dead before he hit the ground. The commander looked things over, asked a few questions, there was a report filed, and then the body was taken away. Later that month, this guy I worked with received his paycheck. There was a 17-cent charge on it under equipment lost. They charged him for the bullet that he had fired. Like I said, the military does some really strange things. Sometime in the early 60s, a young woman was staying in New Mexico when she was awoken by something, a noise or movement. She wasn't sure, but as she looked around the room, she saw a monk standing next to her bed. He was holding one arm out over her body. She was groggy and unsure of what she was seeing, so she stuck out one hand to touch him to see if he was real. The monk dissolved into ash on the floor. There's no record of her keeping any of the ash or even showing it to anyone. In the 60s, anything like this would have been grounds for a person to be shunned, if not locked up. Years later, 1966, the same woman was in the Women's Auxiliary Ferry Squadron, better known as the WAFs. She just returned to her apartment near McGuire Air Force Base. As she walked into her bedroom, she saw a pair of hands with extremely long fingers holding onto the windowsill. The skin was inhumanly pale. The window was open, but she was positive it had been closed and locked when she left the apartment earlier. Being startled by what might be someone or something trying to break in, she let out with a scream. The neighbors, hearing the scream, called the air police. When they arrived, the APs saw a very tall, thin man running away from her building. He had on some kind of a sweater or sweatshirt with the main part of the garment pulled up over his head. At least, that's what they said. They gave chase, but they were unable to catch the man, or the creature. He ran way too fast. I have to ask, was it a sweater pulled up over the guy's head, or was there just no head? At about 3 a.m., 1968, a British officer stationed in Cyprus was awakened by his dog growling. The dog was a Turkish wolfhound, a huge animal bred for guarding flocks. They're considered to be extremely calm, reliable, and intelligent. After alerting his master to some danger, the dog crawled under the bed and hid. The officer noticed there was a high-pitched sound coming from outside his room. He opened the door and saw a bizarre thing in his hallway. This thing looked like it had a large, flat, orange face with bright red eyes. The hair was red and wiry-looking, sticking out in all directions. The body was covered by a light blue outfit that looked like a jumpsuit. It appeared to be floating just above the floor. The sound he was hearing was coming from this thing. As the officer watched, the sound began to increase. This kind of scared him, so he slammed the door and locked it. He grabbed the only weapon he had, which was a spear gun used for fishing. He also had a knife that he grabbed, and then he sat on his bunk, not knowing what to do next. And he simply sat there watching the door, hoping this thing would go away. The sound did slowly fade, but he didn't quite have the nerve to open the door and have a look to see if it was out there. Eventually, he fell back to sleep, and when he awoke in the morning, he was still holding the spear gun and the knife. He asked around, and not saying, "Did you see any bright orange creature in the hallway?" but he just asked, "Did anything strange happen last night?" To which everybody else said, "No, not a thing. No one saw anything, and nobody heard anything." Camp Pendleton is just north of San Diego, California. In the fall of 1968, a Marine stationed at the camp had a very weird encounter. In the military, a camp is usually a temporary installation. A fort is a small, permanent location, and a huge fort is called a base. Fort Knox is huge, and Camp Pendleton is anything but temporary. During a training mission, one of the Marines was sitting in a foxhole looking for any activity from the Op Force. Op Force is the U.S. military folks who play the part of the enemy soldiers. They dress in foreign uniforms and they carry weapons that would belong to the enemy, so they look realistic. When you run into these guys on a training mission, you'll swear you're dealing with the enemy. But they're our own guys. As he was sitting there, the Marine saw movement, so he focused his attention on something moving around in the darkness. He described it as huge, 7 to 8 feet tall, and about 3 feet across at the shoulders. It had a pointy head, long arms that hung down at its side. He woke the rest of the squadron and brought their attention to this creature, and they all observed this huge thing. It was moving up the side of the hill and coming right towards them. As it was getting too close for comfort, the creature began to slowly turn and move to the side of the men in the foxhole. It vanished into the trees on the right side of them. The rest of the night was quiet, but nobody managed to get any sleep that night. A short time later, the Marine who first spotted this Bigfoot creature submitted a report to the BFRO. He asked for his name to be kept off of the report because he didn't want to be known as that guy, the person who saw things that didn't supposedly exist. There were some weird sightings of things that amounted to monster sightings during the Vietnam War. Earl Morrison served as a private in the 1st Marine Division in Vietnam when he and 2 others had a brush with an unexplained something in the summer of 1969 near Da Nang. Morrison said all 3 men were sitting on top of a bunker when they noticed a glowing figure approaching. The figure wasn't walking towards them, she was floating or flying. The woman was completely naked, with black skin, and she had huge wings like a bat. The wings moved slowly as the woman approached their position. The air around her seemed to glow bright green. She kept getting closer to the 3 men, who could only sit and watch, unsure what it was they were looking at. Soon they could make out details, such as her arms were attached to the wings. They could see that she was very thin, and the skin of the wings was nearly see-through. This flying woman went right over their heads and kept going into the distance, behind their bunker. Soon the green glow was lost to sight. Gary Linderer was one of a 6-man patrol from the 101st Airborne Division Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol. He was in Vietnam when he ran into something unexplained. His squad was out in the brush, far from their base. That's what long-range patrols did. They had to carry everything they might need with them. Noise and light were kept to the bare minimum. They were well behind enemy lines, and should anything go wrong, they were pretty much on their own. Their mission was to gather intel, not fight the enemy. As they moved through the jungle, a creature stepped out from a thick brush. It was about 5 feet tall, nearly as wide at the shoulders, and it was covered with thick hair. The top of the head was rounded, and the forearms stuck out from the rest of the face. The forehead stuck out from the rest of the face. The face was also covered with hair. The name of the game was to get in, look around, and get out without alerting the VC. Seeing this weird creature, the squad froze in place and waited. The creature moved along the trail and then vanished into the trees. All communication was by hand signals until they could find a safe position to sit and take a break. Once they had a place to relax, just a bit, talk about what they had seen. One of them asked if this was the legendary rock apes, seen by other teams. The answer was no. One of the members of the LRP team had seen rock apes, and this did not look anything like those other creatures. Rock apes got their name from throwing rocks at soldiers. The locals called these beings forest people, having seen them for years before the U.S. military had arrived. Eventually, it was learned that soldiers on both sides of the fighting had seen these forest people walking around in this part of the 3 countries, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. The basic description is the creature looked like an orangutan, walking upright. It walked on 2 legs. Some people call this the orang pendek. It didn't need to support itself with its hands like an ape does when it walks. It wasn't having a balancing problem. It simply walked like a man. Orangutan had died out in Vietnam sometime in the Pleistocene era. The North Vietnamese were so interested in these forest dwellers, they sent out scientific expeditions to study the creatures even during the heaviest times of fighting. The scientists were never able to find any of these forest people, but they did find footprints, and they cast several tracks. The foot was about as long as a human, but wider. In recent times, another track was cast that matched the first one. I used to work with the most laid-back guy on the planet. Now, this was not a monster sighting, more like a monster occurrence. He was a supervisor, and you had to really screw up to get him to even look at you hard. We called him the X-Man. He didn't talk much, but once in a while he'd get to talking about things from the past. Things like when he was in Vietnam in the Marine Corps. He was as far north as you could get and still be in South Vietnam. Their fire base was constantly being shelled. He was sitting in a foxhole one day just waiting for the shelling to stop. You can hear mortars as they fly through the air. They're landing all around the base. X-Man heard one coming close, and he hoped it would land somewhere else. The round hit the ground right at his feet. He looked at it, the tail sticking up out of the mud, and figured he was already dead, and nothing he could possibly do in the microseconds that this thing had hit. All he had time for was maybe one breath. Well, he took that breath, and then he took a second, followed by a third. The round didn't go off. It was a dud. He looked at it, and finally he crawled up out of the foxhole, leaving the mortar rounds sticking there in the mud, and got to his feet and walked away slowly. He was wondering why he was still alive when so many other people had died in similar situations. After his hands quit shaking, he pulled himself together and decided that that was probably the worst thing that was ever going to happen to him, and from then on, he was a completely different man. He'd survived for unknown reasons, and he no longer let things bother him. He was the best supervisor I ever had. A man who went by the name of Wes said, while serving in the military, he was stationed at RAF Alconbury in 1970. He was inside the secure weapons storage area when he saw a werewolf. Being in charge of guarding weapons, he was armed, but seeing a werewolf, he didn't shoot at it. He felt as if seeing this beast was just something to remember but not act on. The creature never made any aggressive actions towards him. He described it as bipedal, about 5 feet tall, hairy, completely covered with hair, with a flat snout and large eyes. After his encounter, Wes continued looking around, hoping to see this beast again. Most people have an encounter like this, they would pray that they'd never had another one, but this guy felt so much different about it, he wanted to see the werewolf again. Now, he did catch a glimpse of something in the dark one time that he thinks may have been the werewolf, but it was far away and moving through the dark. This wasn't the first time of people seeing what they thought was a werewolf in this area. About 70 miles west from the airbase, just after the Second World War, England experienced a series of grisly murders carried out by a man who came to be known as the Moon Killer, showing all the characteristics of a werewolf. He claimed that the lunar cycles influenced his behavior and turned him into a homicidal maniac. Alan Whitcomb Dennis was found guilty of a series of murders after telling the police that the moon does strange things to me. He was eventually linked to 3 killings in the city of Birmingham over a 17-year period. The press dubbed him the Moon Killer. Edwin Godoy was stationed in Fort Lewis in Washington State, 1978. His platoon was returning from a training exercise in the forest at about 8 p.m. Their truck suddenly lost power and died. Unable to start it back up and with no mechanic available until morning, the platoon formed up to march back to base. Since Godoy had signed for the truck, their commander kind of ordered him to remain behind while all the other soldiers went back home. It's a bad idea to leave equipment unattended. If it's on a base, other units will come along and help themselves to parts. I can neither confirm nor deny the unit I was with acquired extra parts from tanks that we found unattended sitting in locations. It was not right to disable a military vehicle, but things like extra track blocks and water cans and searchlights and things that weren't necessary for the vehicle to operate, well, they may have wound up on one of our tanks. Can neither confirm nor deny that ever happened. If the vehicle, let's say it's a truck, is parked off a base, somebody might just come along and steal the whole truck. So you always have somebody left behind to guard things. Just after midnight, Godoy noticed a huge hair-covered figure with red eyes. It was swaying back and forth. It was about 1,000 feet away. This creature began running towards the soldier. Godoy shouted for the thing to halt. As it got closer, he began to fear for his life, and he aimed and fired at it. The creature clutched its chest and then turned and ran into the trees on the side of the road. Godoy thought this might not be the only beast in the area, so he locked himself in the truck. He sat there unable to sleep until the sun was up and the mechanics arrived to fix his truck. You just might ask why he had live rounds while on a training exercise. Well, let's just say that sometimes people carry live ammo when they're not supposed to, or perhaps he was issued a pistol with rounds in it. Sometimes, like I said, the military does strange things. Maybe something was going on that we don't know about, but he had a .45 caliber pistol with bullets in it. Real bullets, not blanks. Once he was back at the base, Godoy was questioned about his encounter. The area where the truck had broken down was searched, and the boys in the white lab coats showed up asking questions and taking samples. The searchers found huge footprints, and there was blood on the ground, which they followed into the trees. Once the entire investigation was finished, they simply declared it had been a bear encounter. Linda Godfrey was on my show twice. She was such a nice person, I enjoyed talking to her both on and off the air. She wrote 21 books on nonfiction subjects. The Beast of Bray Road, I believe, was the first one she wrote. She was kind of unofficially known as the Werewolf Lady. She also wrote a fictional book called God Johnson. It's a work of humor, and it's well worth reading if you ever get a chance. God Johnson, the unforgiven diary of the disciple of a lesser god, aspiring actress Liberty Abbott agrees to be the sole disciple of a minor deity and Abraham Lincoln look-alike in exchange for a fast track to world hunger-fighting super celebrityhood. It's a weird story. It takes place in Madison, Wisconsin, and like I said, it is well worth reading if you get a chance. I will never know how the sequel turned out, seeing as Linda died November 27th, 2022. I remember seeing her on a TV show a few months before her death, and I thought she did not look well. The way she moved and the way she looked in the face, I kept thinking there's something wrong, but, well, she wasn't exactly a teenager. Too bad the folks doing the show only talked to her for a few minutes. That's kind of the way the show went. When they were looking into the Van Meter monster, they had Chad Lewis on for only a couple seconds, and then they tried to explain everything away as being just the shadow of a giant bat. Hollywood has a weird way of telling us about unexplained mysteries. Well, a former member of the United States Navy, going by the name of Emma, wrote to Linda Godfrey and told her this next story. In 1994, while stationed in Illinois at the Navy Hospital at the Great Lakes, she had a weird encounter while on shore patrol. Her and two others were working security, and they were talking back and forth on the radio. It was a quiet night with nothing really going on. At about 3 a.m., Emma tried to contact one of the other sailors, who also just happened to be her boyfriend and future spouse. He did not respond. She walked to his last stated location, and found this young man standing there staring into the woods. Following his gaze, Emma saw a tall figure with an odd head. Later, when she saw a cartoon representing the Egyptian god Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification and the afterlife, Emma said this is what the creature had resembled. It had a large green-yellow eyes and long arms. The third member of the patrol arrived to also stare at this creature. After a few seconds, this Anubis-looking being puffed up like a cat, turned and walked off into the night. When things like this happen, the witnesses are highly unmotivated to file a report. You don't want to be known as that guy who sees things. The last thing you need is to be known as a weirdo in the military. It's kind of a career-changing occurrence. Madison County, Illinois, in St. Jacob, a witness encountered a huge insect. Not wishing to be known as the Bug Man, he kept his name off of any reports. He did contact Cryptozoology News, and he gave them the details. It was about 3 a.m., he said, and he was driving along the highway when a giant insect came up in his headlights. This huge creature scared the heck out of him. He quickly stepped on the brakes, bringing the car to a halt. This insect looked to be about a 7-foot-tall walking stick. Diaphragmora femerata, better known as the common walking stick or the northern walking stick, is a species of phasmid or stick insect found across North America. The average length of this bug is 3 inches for a male and 3 3/4 for a female. The insect is found in deciduous forests throughout North America, where it eats many types of plants. The walking stick has 6 legs. The 7-foot-tall creature that the driver saw only had 4 legs. As it was crossing the pavement, the creature turned towards the vehicle. It had no facial features, no eyes or mouth. It crossed the highway in front of his car, moving off into the brush on the side of the road. This report was submitted with no name. A man from Jefferson City, Missouri, said he saw a giant rabbit while driving on Highway 85 near Lusk, Wyoming. In 2012, he was driving, it was about 1 a.m., when he saw what looked like a 4-foot-tall rabbit hopping across the pavement. The body was that of a rabbit, and it had long ears, but the face looked more like a dog. The movement was just like a rabbit, only it looked to be moving in slow motion. The driver swerved right, and the rabbit dog dodged to the left, but he felt the slight impact as he went by. He stepped on the brakes and backed up to where he'd seen this weird creature, but it was gone. There was no blood or any fur on the road or his vehicle. A taxicab was carrying a passenger through Elizabethton, Tennessee, when the passenger saw what looked like a 2-foot-tall kangaroo. It was described as running, not hopping, alongside the vehicle. The driver had just swerved, but he said he hadn't seen anything. Why he swerved, I wonder, but he swears he didn't see anything. The passenger said it looked exactly like a kangaroo, moving on two legs. Phantom kangaroo have been seen all over the United States. During a tornado in 1899 in Richmond, Wisconsin, a woman saw a kangaroo leaping across her backyard. In 1934, a giant kangaroo killed and ate a couple of dogs in Hamburg, Tennessee. January 1934, the folks living in Hamburg, Arkansas, were finding their livestock had been killed by some unknown beast. As they were working their fields, many of them saw a kangaroo-like creature. The connection was made between the killings and the kangaroo. A posse was formed, and they went out looking for this creature. They chased it south into the next county, but they were never able to pursue it any further. Now, I tried to find out if the two Hamburg towns could have been the same location, with confusion in the names of the states, but I couldn't find any connection. One had dogs killed, and the other it was sheep, goats, and young calves. It was the same year for both reports, but there is a Hamburg, Tennessee, and a Hamburg, Arkansas. Both of these were said to be the work of a killer kangaroo. Loren Coleman wrote about the phantom kangaroo sightings that took place near South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, just over 200 miles southwest of Elizabethtown, in 1934. Several witnesses reported the kangaroo-like beast over a 5-day period. They said it had killed and partly eaten several animals, including ducks, geese, and dogs. Kangaroo tracks were followed but ended near the entrance to a cave, and nobody was quite brave enough to go inside the cave and have a look around. I looked for any more sightings of kangaroo in Alabama, Mississippi, or Louisiana in 1934, but I couldn't find any reports. I'm sure there are some out there. It's just being limited and not driving to the area to ask people. In 1958, Charles Wetzel saw a kangaroo chasing dogs near his cabin in the Platte River near Grand Island in Nebraska. We don't have kangaroo in the United States. I'm sure most people know that, but there might be a few out there who don't. But people are constantly seeing what are referred to as phantom kangaroos. Now, the knee-jerk reaction is always that these are animals that either escaped from a crashed circus train. If you listen to the boys in the white lab coats, there must be hundreds of circus trains running off the tracks on a weekly basis. Or it is a creature that escaped from a zoo. Well, apparently these zoos must be releasing kangaroos on a daily basis in order to make up for all of these sightings. A report from the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, was given by a police officer in a small town of Mercerville, New Jersey. The unidentified officer said he'd been off duty and sitting on his back porch when he looked to the sky and he saw a dark gray, snake-like creature flying through the air with two sets of wings, a regular set and another smaller set of wings at the far end of its body. Its wings were very thin and long, and it moved like an eel or a snake. It moved through the air like a sea creature would move through the water. He also said the body was about 10 feet long with no discernible head. The witness called it a snake bird. He didn't see any legs or feet. Sky serpents have been seen for hundreds of years in just about every country on the planet. 1873, a farmer witnessed an enormous serpent. It was as big around and as long as a telegraph pole. It had yellow stripes on a black body. The serpent appeared to be riding through the clouds, moving just like a snake, heading east. If you saw the movie Predator, you can imagine what folks are reporting seeing as the creature would move about in its cloaked condition. People report what looked like a pixelated being moving around them. On Expanded Perspectives, Cam and Kyle call these glimmermen. One report comes from a woman who says her and her husband moved into a new home in western Pennsylvania in 2000. After getting to know the area, one evening they went out to look at deer in the wilderness. My wife loves to do this, but we do it around Texas A&M International. You'll see lots of cars driving around at night, and anytime there's a herd of deer or javelina, the car will stop and folks will take photographs. On dark nights, you need a strong flashlight to see them. The only shooting done is with cameras. The couple in Pennsylvania took some dirt roads way out into the country, farmland and rural areas with few and far between houses. They brought along a spotlight to get a better view of the animals. Sometimes the best way to see deer is by stopping and scanning the field with the light. Deer eyes shine in the light from a flashlight. The couple had stopped and were panning the light across the field when they saw something that caught their full attention. In the field they saw what looked like a shape of a man, only it was made up of what looked like water. It was a bit broken up and shimmered. As the light hit the shape, there was no reflection coming back from it, and there was no shadow cast behind it. The thing they were looking at stood still as if trying to not attract any attention. You'll see movement before you'll see a shape. The couple sat there looking at what was there with no idea what it might be. After a few minutes, the shape moved away from them, going down into a low spot next to a stream. It disappeared into this low area. A 47-year-old Gerald Farr from Tulalip, Tulalip, Washington, says he'd seen what he calls invisible people on many occasions. He has seen them on his property, sometimes standing around or moving around for hours at a time. The first time he saw them, he thought he was seeing somebody dressed in camouflage, sitting still just beyond the edge of the outside lights. The more he studied them, the more he began to think these people were wearing some kind of a space-age electronic cloaking device. He describes them as looking like the creature in Predator. One night he spotted around 30 of these shimmery-looking humans in a field. A construction worker saw a glimmerman while driving near Seattle, Washington. August 2018, he was riding in a company truck heading to a job site. As they were pulling off the freeway, he saw what looked like the Predator moving along the edge of the pavement. Not the Predator when he was visible, but when he was cloaked. There were a few homeless people nearby, but they all acted as if not seeing or not caring that there was something there. The sighting lasted about 4 or 5 seconds. I thought about including this one with the military sightings, but the witness was a firefighter, so I moved it to the bottom of the show. He did see a flying humanoid. He was in Sydney, Ohio, July 1990. The man was walking home and was just about a block from his house. He looked up at the sky because it was getting dark as a thunderstorm was moving in from the north. The wind had picked up, and the witness glanced up to see how bad the storm was going to be. Silhouetted against the black clouds, he saw a white shape. At first, he thought it was a plastic bag or something like that being blown by the wind. As he watched it, it took on the shape of a human, about 8 or 9 feet tall. It had wings, 2 arms, and 2 legs. Now, some flying humanoids had the wings as a part of their arms, while others have both. The flying creature was about 400 feet off the ground and about 120 yards from the witness. Try as he might, he couldn't figure out what he was looking at. Then he got to thinking, this must be an angel. Would an angel show up preceding a storm, or some other thing that was not quite so friendly that took on the looks of an angel? A lot of times when people have sightings like this and they say, oh, this is a insert creature here, is it really what they're seeing, or could it be something taking on that look? For example, when somebody has a Bigfoot sighting and they say, oh, look, it's a Bigfoot, are they actually seeing a Bigfoot, or are they seeing some kind of a spirit that is taken on the image of a Bigfoot for nefarious reasons? The old people living in Appalachia warned the young folks not to look up when walking through the woods, or they might catch the unwanted attention of devil monkeys that live in the trees. These mountains take up a large portion of eastern United States, running from New York down to Mississippi. The devil monkeys are said to resemble a primate, but with an unusual snout that looks more like a dog. It sounds almost like a baboon. They are said to stand between 5 and 8 feet tall, which does not sound like a baboon. They're also said to switch between walking on all fours or leaping along on 2 feet. Urban legend says these creatures are extremely aggressive and can camouflage so well that it looks as if the trees are moving on their own. The story goes, as long as you don't look at these monkeys, they'll leave you alone. If you see them, and you're looking at them, or you're looking for them, that's when trouble will start. Should you find yourself suddenly seeing a monkey in the mountains, you have to pretend that you don't see them and walk slowly away as if nothing is going on. If you do yell and run, like say you're in a movie or a TV show, the devil monkeys will call its friends and they'll make short order out of you. You've heard of a short order cook? Hot and fast? Bad things will happen if the devil monkeys get you. Virginia, where my nephew lives, is said to be crawling with murderous monkeys. Locals call these creatures devil monkeys as well. They resemble gigantic baboons with long canine snouts. The devil monkeys come equipped with a long tail and kangaroo-like back legs, which allows them to jump insane distances. While they're usually about 4 feet tall, they can reach a height of up to 6 feet if they're standing on their back legs. They have red eyes, sharp claws, and ultra-aggressive attitude. It should come as no surprise that devil monkeys don't get along with humans. According to a witness, her parents were driving near Saltville, Virginia, when they were suddenly attacked by one of these creatures. The couple described the monkey as having light, taffy-colored hair, with white blaze down its neck and underbelly. The creature was running on 2 back legs, and as the couple frantically tried to drive away, the devil monkey slashed at the vehicle, leaving 3 massive scratch marks on the side of their car. A few days later, the devil monkey returned. 2 nurses were driving around the same area near Saltville when the monster pounced on their car and tore open the convertible roof. The nurses were terrified, but they managed to escape with their lives by driving very fast. The monkey lost its grip on the car and fell to the side of the road. Since then, the devil monkeys have been seen multiple times throughout the area, hopping across the roads and then vanishing into the trees. I don't know if this is the same cryptid being talked about or something that is similar and has the same name. Devil monkeys might refer to 2 distinct groups of cryptids, or it could be the devil monkey comes different sizes and shapes. If you do run into an aggressive monkey while in the Appalachians, you better worry about what kind of creature this is. Are you going to worry about what kind of creature this is, or are you just going to say that's a devil monkey and walk away slowly. Remember, try to act like you didn't see them. If the folks out there who don't believe in anything, not sitting in front of one of the boys in the white lab coats, would stop making fun of witnesses, we would probably get a whole lot more reports than what we have out there. Nobody wants to be made fun of. Nobody wants to be ridiculed. So when people do have a sighting, the first thing they're going to say to themselves is, am I going to be laughed at if I tell people about what I saw? And a lot of times the answer is yes, and so they don't report it or they don't talk about it. I get a lot of my best stories from people simply by walking up to them, handing them my business card and asking, have you ever seen a ghost or a UFO or a cryptid? And just about every time they are going to tell me something, they'll look over their shoulder to see if anybody's listening in. They'll tell me their story, which some are extremely detailed. They know times and dates and locations and the people that were with them. And then when they get finished telling me their story, a lot of times they will say, please don't use my name. So I'll assign them a name in one of my books, and I'm having a hard time coming up with new names to use. So if you see the same name being used over and over, it's not because it's the same person making the report. It's because I couldn't think of another name to use. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, let your friends and neighbors and people you don't even know what they're missing. If you didn't like the show, why are you listening to it? Until next time, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?